Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm on the 400 block of Park Avenue, and behind me is a fantastic dragon mural that speaks to the fact that this once was at the heart of Baltimore's Chinatown. And if you're following along these videos real time, today is February 1st, 2022, and today is Chinese New Year's. And we thought we would celebrate by covering Baltimore's Chinatown, which we're going to do right now. Have to start with a quick thanks to some researchers at UMBC who did wonderful work this past semester on the history of Chinatown. Paul Bessie, Garrett Fries, Harrison Myers, and Caitlin Schoen. Thank you so much. Your work is going into today's video. All right, let's start by turning back the clock to the 1870s and immigration into Baltimore. Many of us think of immigration into Baltimore at that time as people, mostly Europeans, arriving by boat at Locust Point and then getting on a train, the B&O, and heading west out into America. Well, Chinatown got started sort of the opposite. It was folks who had come from China into the West Coast to California and Oregon and states like that, and then were heading eastward, and a handful of them ended up here in Chinatown. Those folks were mostly single young men. They had come to America in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, some prospecting for gold. Most didn't get rich. Maybe some did. Most didn't, like everybody else. Some working for the Transcontinental Railroad. In 1869, the final spike was laid between the Central Pacific Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroad, connecting the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States. Almost immediately after that, anti-Chinese sentiment began to rise steeply, particularly on the West Coast. Cities like San Francisco had anti-Chinese riots in the street. And in response, tens of thousands of folks who had been living there maybe for years headed east to try to escape that. And a handful came here to Marion Street, just a block or two away, and started our own Chinatown, eventually growing to 400 or 500 people and taking over a couple blocks of Park Avenue that we still today call Chinatown. By the 1880s, and we think it may be a little bit earlier, but by the 1880s, at the heart of Chinatown was a restaurant called the Empire Restaurant by a gentleman named Guy Ott. So we've had a Chinese restaurant in Baltimore since the 1880s. But there were a couple other restaurants, a couple laundry businesses, a couple grocers, and a number of gambling houses. If you read the old Baltimore Sun articles, they love to cover police raids of the gambling houses. It was a group of mostly single young men, remember. And that remained that way until about maybe the 1920s, and love found a way, as it always will, and a number of these young men married either within the Chinese community or within the Baltimore community, the larger Baltimore community, and started families. Some of those families retained their traditional Chinese religion. Some of them converted to Christianity, and Grace and St. Peter's Church, just a few blocks up the street, was a welcoming haven for them. In 1924, they had started a Sunday school for children of Chinese families here specifically. I want to share one sentiment from a gentleman named Dr. J.S. Wu, who was a leader in Baltimore's Chinatown community from the 1920s. I think speaking on behalf of many immigrant parents, he lamented the fact that many children were going to what he called white schools. And then he lamented this. He said, they all say, "you bet," and such things as "hot diggity dog." And then you can almost hear him end with a sigh. He says, "It's all for the best, I suppose." And I'm sure that is a sentiment shared by many families, with the tension between retaining cultural values and assimilating into the new culture. In the 1930s, we're moving on. The Great Depression hit Chinatown here, but maybe not as hard as in other places around America, in part at least because of a group called the Chinese Merchants Association that had been started years before. It basically set a floor on prices that merchants could charge, so nobody would undercut another merchant and put them out of business. In the 1930s, a number of folks also became both politically and civically active. In 1933, Chinatown sent its first delegation to a citywide parade. They sent a troupe of lion dancers to the thrill of all the parade watchers. And then folks like Bach Ark and his wife Sue Chu started philanthropic groups in 1938, I believe it was 1938, the Second Sino-Japanese War had begun, displacing loads and loads of Chinese folks. And Miss Chu and her group raised $125. I think her group was called the Chinese Women's Association of Baltimore. They raised $125 and sent it over to Kukang, China, to help a group of displaced folks start a soap-making cooperative, which is pretty neat. We think today of the international philanthropies that have micro-grants to help small businesses. We were doing that. Miss Chu and her group were doing that 100 years before. In the 1950s, Chinatown started to see a dispersal. Like communities across Baltimore and America, people were leaving for the suburbs, including folks here in Chinatown along Park Avenue. By 1958, we still had 4 restaurants, a couple grocers and other businesses, but things were dwindling a little bit. And Chinatown responded. In the 1970s, a gentleman named Calvin Chin and a group called the Chinese Benevolent Association proposed building a 14-story apartment building here, complete with a Chinese language school and a Chinese museum. That unfortunately never happened. In the 2000s, the Chang family had proposed basically creating a new Chinatown in the Station North neighborhood. That also never came to fruition, although we did get the Chinatown bus that many of us take to go up to Chinatown in New York. And most recently, a local developer has proposed redeveloping the historic buildings along this block of Park Avenue and building a new building here as a way to help revive this area. I don't know where that stands. I think we're all going to have to cross our fingers that it will move forward when COVID starts to lift. All right, I want to wrap up because it is Chinese New Year. With another little quote from the Baltimore Sun from 1891, as they covered a group of laundry businessmen as they celebrated Chinese New Year. Here's what the Sun has to say. Hospitable smiles awaited the laundrymen wherever they went among their fellow countrymen. Gung ho fat choi, said the caller as he crossed the threshold of house after house, to which he turned his steps and greeted his friends. The words convey the wish, may you be happy and prosperous always. So I want to end by saying to all of you, and especially to my daughter, Leah Yoon Hopkins, who just about this time of the year, 17 years ago, was born in Nanning, China, and who is still my sometimes camera woman, I want to say to you, Gung Hei Fat Choi. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.